Welcome back to another episode of the Still Curtain podcast. We got a fun show planned for today. We're going to talk about Pat Freiermuth's statements about the slow offense. Very interesting there. And we're going to get into the Senior Bowl, which is the biggest topic around sports this week, and talk about maybe all the prospects the Steelers could be eyeing there. And we've already heard a few things. But before we dive into that, Shane, let's talk about some of the other trending topics this week. So far, no update on Brian Flores yet, although we're hearing about other coaches being hired for some of these positions. There are some defensive coordinator positions still left out available. I think there's 4 or 5 still open. And so it doesn't mean that he's not going to get one yet, but interesting to see that Flores is still here. He's still available to the Steelers. Not only that, but he was spotted at the Senior Bowl in full Steelers gear. And so I don't know if we can read into that at all, if that's any indication, but he's here for now.
Yeah, and I think that does, to me, at least say that he hasn't come to any conclusions, right? Like maybe he still wants to interview with some jobs, maybe still in the running for a couple things, but I think that he is doing the right thing and focusing on what he knows he can do, which is help the Steelers out the Senior Bowl, focus on that. And if something comes up that he wants to take, then he can obviously take that. He can get ready to do that. But I would love to just keep him around for another year, obviously, for a lot of reasons. One, because if things don't work out with maybe Terrell Austin and Flores, maybe can hop into that role as defensive coordinator or just whatever it may be. He's just a good resource to have as a former head coach on the staff. And if he does leave next year, we do get some comp picks for that, so that's great. If obviously that's kind of a secondary thing, but it would be nice if that's possible. But yeah, I'm not going to be surprised if he sticks around, if he just doesn't either get any jobs he wants, or there's just really isn't any that he wants to take. So.
Yeah, and I mean, Flores is a young guy. He's had success in Miami. He's been a head coach, and so he's going to get that next opportunity. And so it's for him. I think it's whether he's waiting for the right team with the right defense, or if he's maybe holding out for that head coaching opportunity that he should get here in the near future. And like you said, it does make it a little bit interesting as a Steelers fan, because if he stays at least one more year, then the minority rule comes into place, where the Steelers could get a potentially, if he's hired away as a head coach, a 3rd round pick in that year's draft and a 3rd round pick in the following year's draft. So just a little bit of added compensation there as well. I don't know. We've talked about this a little bit last week on the pod. I don't know which way I'm leaning right now. Like I kind of think that I kind of think that he's going to be hired away still is just a gut feeling. But Mia, what do you think?
I mean, it would make sense for a team to bring him on as a defensive coordinator. He did a good job in a role similar to that, and we know that that's his bread and butter, right? As a head coach, he had his issues a little bit, and those were documented in Miami. But I think as a defensive first guy, and as a guy that could come in and help your defense, a lot of multiple looks, that Belichickian type of scheme where he just gets guys in the right position, comes from that lineage. That's always something that I think works out better as coordinators, more so than head coaches historically. Obviously, there's some success stories in there as well. But in general, I think it would make sense for a team to bring him in as defensive coordinator. I look at, maybe the Panthers. I think their opening is still there with the new head coach, Frank Reich. Like, that would make a lot of sense. It's a young, fast defense, a lot of movable pieces. That would make a lot of sense. I could see him having a really good time with those guys there. But really, it just comes down to, like, does he get any true offers? And if he does he think that they're the right opportunity for him? And if they aren't, then I think he'll be back here. But it is kind of 50-50 at this point for me too.
Yeah, and so let's go through those openings right now. Just see what's available. Carolina job, defensive coordinator. Denver's defensive coordinator. Indy and Houston both have D coordinator jobs open. And so does San Francisco after losing D'Amico Ryan. So I can see maybe that is a potential fit right there. Already have a very talented defense if they were interested. I don't know. I would assume that he's going to get a couple more interviews this year before that process is over. Obviously, the Steelers would love to have him back for a second season in case things go south with Terrell Austin, or if just to have him there to be the linebackers coach and defensive assistant. Also in the news this week, we got another Pro Bowler added to the list. We had just one before this. TJ Watt backed out. It was Minkah Fitzpatrick, who was pretty much consensus first team All-Pro player this year, well-deserving. Cameron Hayward was just added to the Pro Bowl roster. He replaces Chris Jones, who is obviously preparing for the Super Bowl with the Kansas City Chiefs. I mean, Hayward's obviously deserving of this. It's just hard initially, though. I know that people were upset when he didn't make the Pro Bowl. That would have been his 5th in a row. It's really hard to argue the names that were over top of him on that list, though. Like, Chris Jones was phenomenal this year. Jeffrey Simmons was really good, and Quinton Williams were really good. So he was just happened to be the odd man out. He gets the nod back in, though.
Yeah, and I think it's totally fair when you look at the names in front of him. Like, obviously, Cam had a really good season still, and he's had a great, back end of his career, if you can even call it that, because really he's just been better in really the
Mhm.
back half than the first half. But it made sense that, at least with him, that he didn't quite make the cut. There's a lot of really good, talented young guys. And Chris Jones, again, he had his not breakout season. He's been a great player, but really probably his strongest season overall as a Chief. So it's hard to really put him in over any of those guys. But definitely deserved. He is a Pro Bowl caliber player. Just sometimes, guys in front of you have better years, and it just is what it is. But definitely glad to see him get a chance to make it in, especially with TJ backing out, which I understand. Like, he has more things to worry about than going to the Pro Bowl games, with still trying to probably get back fully healthy. But I just hope Cam has a good time with it. I know he'd rather be in Chris Jones's shoes and not be able to do it because he's in the Super Bowl. But at the very least, hopefully, it can be a nice way to kind of end the season for him.
Yep, absolutely. And Cam's had a very interesting career path, former
Yeah,
first round
for
pick.
sure.
And he was good early on. It's just he wasn't a Pro Bowl player until his
Right.
7th year in the league. And since then, he's made the Pro Bowl every year, 5 years straight, if you count this one as the alternate. And so very, very good in the back half of his career. Man, if he would have had the front half of his career match the back half of his career, I mean, he's a first
Surefire
ballot Hall of
yeah.
Famer.
Yeah,
With,
surefire Hall of
yes,
Famer,
with that. And so now it'll be interesting to see. He's on that trend. How much longer does he have? I mean, typically, from the research that we've done, it's typically 4 first-team All-Pros is like the benchmark to help get you into the Hall of Fame. Cam has 3 right now. And so whether or not he's going to get that 4th one at age 34, age 35, I mean, the clock is ticking. I don't want to say that he's done. He still looks as good as ever. But yeah, I think that it'll be interesting to see where he winds up someday in that Hall of Fame race there. Another big topic, this is actually bigger than Cam's, was this week. All right, we had another dropout. Josh Allen dropped out of the Pro Bowl. Not unusual to see. We see players doing that kind of stuff all the time for various reasons. But it wasn't Kenny Pickett who replaced him. It wasn't Derek Carr. Well, Derek Carr ended up replacing Joe Burrow, who also dropped out. There were some quality names still left on the list. Justin Herbert was still there. They decided to put Brett Huntley in the Pro Bowl. And
Tyler Huntley just
I did that last time. I don't
Yeah,
know why
Brett
I was.
Huntley. It's because he's played for
Packers,
everybody, and you just assume it's
yes.
him because he's played everywhere.
Thank you for correcting me. They
No, you're
decided to
good,
put Tyler Huntley in the Pro Bowl. Huntley had 4 starts this year, had 2 passing touchdowns, had a QBR of 41. Do you agree with that decision, Shane?
So it's not even really for me. Like, yeah, if you're gonna take Tyler Huntley and put him in the Pro Bowl, yeah, you could put Kenny Pickett instead because he's better. But that's not really my problem. It's why is Huntley the guy? Period. Like, no offense to Tyler Huntley, like he did a decent job filling in for Lamar Jackson for 2 years in a row now. Not a bad player by any means. I don't think he's a fun player sometimes. It almost feels like it's just because I think it's not the Pro Bowl game anymore. It's like the flag football. He's a fun flag football kind of guy. Maybe that's part of it. Like, maybe they just assume that he's a guy that would go out there and actually like really try to compete and like mess around and have a good time. That might be why. Plus, the speed element at quarterback, he's a good runner. Like, maybe that's the reason. But at the same time, that's not what this is supposed to be about. At the end of the day, it's supposed to be about putting the best players you can in the game, giving them those nods. And like, even Tyler Huntley's probably thinking like, Pro Bowl, like I played 4 games. Like, I feel like even he's probably like, I don't know about this one. Like, it feels strange. Like, yeah, I'd much rather see another guy get an opportunity. Maybe just no one wanted it. Maybe they just were like, you know what, I'm not interested in this. Justin Herbert, I know he's already not a very big like camera guy. Like, he doesn't want to be in the spotlight very much unless he has to be for games. Maybe he just wasn't interested, but just a strange decision, more so than just Kenny. Like, I'd love to see Kenny get in just for the fun of it, but like, it's more about why is it Tyler Huntley for me?
Yeah, I know. And it is a very interesting decision. It makes you wonder, did they go to Justin Herbert? Did they go to Kenny Pickett and say, hey, do you want to join the Pro Bowl games last minute here? And we don't know if they did or not at this point, but I would assume they had to at least talk to Herbert. I mean,
at least him.
It's just interesting. 4 starts. Huntley's offense, at least at one point in the season, I remember, was scoring 11 points per game. And he's just not moving the ball effectively. And so it's just an interesting choice. Again, I'm not advocating for Kenny Pickett in the Pro Bowl. He needs to earn that. I don't want him to get in by default in one of those situations where, like, oh, there's nobody else, so you can join. So, and for the same reason, I think people were already talking about, I've heard those discussions, should each conference just go down to 2 Pro Bowl quarterbacks? And maybe the answer is yes, because if we're digging down to putting backups and unspectacular backups in the Pro Bowl at that, I mean, it kind of tarnishes the Pro Bowl a little bit. Not that it already hasn't been. This is why we got rid of the Pro Bowl game to begin with itself. But it does go down on your resume and say, hey, you made the Pro Bowl this year, just like Deontay Johnson was able to. And so Najee did as a rookie. And even those guys were obviously more spectacular than what Tyler Huntley was this year.
Sure.
Just an interesting decision on their part. We're going to move on to the next topic here. This is interesting. And I think a lot of fans are a little bit upset about hearing this, but just recently, Pat Freiermuth, he was on Ben Roethlisberger's podcast, and he was talking about just how grossly oversimplified the Steelers' offense was last year. Like, to him, it was kind of unexpected. He even called it slow. And so I want to read this real quick, what he had to say. This is some of what he had to say on Ben Roethlisberger's podcast. And I want to discuss this a little bit here because I think it is kind of important. So this is Freiermuth on Ben's podcast. It's so different because we didn't have hot routes he's referring to. With you, Ben Roethlisberger, how many times did we have a concept? You look at Deontay Johnson, you gave the signal, it'd be a 12-yard completion. We don't have that this year. He went on to say, so instead of looking at you the whole time, we're looking at the coverage. Like, now I don't know what I'm supposed to do. It was almost too slow because first you weren't anticipating. With you, we could see cover 0 and you would give us the ram, which is the read away from the Mike linebacker. So that would probably be the most different thing between the two. So basically what Freiermuth was saying is that there were no hot routes for the Steelers at the line of scrimmage. I mean, but it's not all that surprising considering how dull Canada's offense was. I don't care if Kenny Pickett is a 20-year-old rookie or a 24-year-old rookie. You have to give your quarterback a little bit of trust and allow him the opportunity to make an adjustment under center. Don't you agree?
And you see, this is the part of things that, like, now that we hear that, right? A lot of the things that were problems this year, as far as like a free blitzer coming and Pickett just basically throwing the ball away and not having anywhere to go. Stuff like all that stuff has context a little bit now, right? Like, because we could assume that like something didn't seem right about this offense from the get-go, basically, regardless of who was playing. And we knew a lot of what the issues were, but this one is probably the most damning to me because even though he's a rookie, and you mentioned it already, you 20-year-old rookie, it doesn't really matter how old your quarterback is, how much experience he has to have the ability, at least built into the offense, to say, hey, I know a blitzer is coming. I know somebody's coming off the edge. I need to get rid of this football in the first second of the play. I need to be able to adjust that. And if he is not allowed to do, like, you do not give him the ability to do that, that is just such a detriment to the offense, not just because of the fact that it creates bad plays, because it's telling your quarterback, you know what, I don't trust you enough to do this. I don't trust your ability to read the defense and make a call. The whole reason that Kenny was drafted, to me, at least in my opinion, and what I think the Steelers were thinking, is that he's a guy who can come in and play immediately if needed, and he's going to be able to run the offense, make calls, make plays after snap, find guys open against different coverages. All that stuff is stuff that he's able to do in college, and they think it could translate to the NFL. Matt Canada apparently did not agree with that, or at least he wasn't willing to find out, and eliminated all of that options from him. And I think that really kind of sheds light on just how bad this offense was constructed. And it does give a little bit more context, like I said, to why it was as bad as it was.
Yeah, so let's talk about what adjustments need to be made here, Shane. I'm looking at the Steelers offense and saying, my goodness, if Freiermuth is willing to come out publicly and say that we don't have hot routes, I mean, I feel like the players are obviously a little bit upset with how the things worked out this past year offensively for the Steelers, and they should be. They scored 18.1 points per game. And like we said on the last pod, even if you prorate the second half of their season, so from the bye week in week 9 all the way to the end of the year, they still would have finished as the 19th best offense in the league in terms of points per game. And that was with a easy schedule. It's just an easy schedule. You played the Panthers, Falcons, Raiders, Ravens with Brett Huntley. I mean, there's no, or Tyler, I did it again. There's no excuse for that. And I think that this certainly, the slow offense certainly attributes to that. And definitely doesn't sound like it's what they want. So in year 2, they have to give Kenny Pickett the ability to make line adjustments. Can you name a quarterback who doesn't have the flexibility to do that, who is a good quarterback?
it just doesn't happen, Tommy. And like, this is the problem with it, is the adjustments that need to be made. First of all, is just that can't be the case anymore. Like, he has to at least be allowed to make adjustments based on what he's seeing from blitz looks, from how they're lined up. If you pre-snap, if you see something that just clearly isn't going to work with the play that they have called, he has to have the autonomy to go, you know what? I'm going to make this adjustment to this route. I'm going to tell Pat to do this. I'm going to tell Deontay to do that. Like, he has to be able to do at least some of that stuff. You cannot rely on your play call, especially because your play calls just aren't that good anyway. I know he doesn't think that, but they're not good anyway. Like, you can't rely on the play call just to work itself out. Or, Kenny, yeah, he'll make plays if something breaks down, and that's good. Like, it's something Ben couldn't do in his last year. So that's, even more important that Ben was a veteran and could make those adjustments himself. But you have to have the ability to make things easier for Kenny. And part of that is allowing him to figure out, okay, this play is coming. I see the defense line up this way. I have to make sure that Pat runs, a quick slant here to get inside of the linebacker, to do whatever the case may be. It doesn't really matter the specifics. It just has to happen. And you have to let Kenny make some more of these calls. He has to call his own plays a little bit sometimes. The 2-minute drill, like, there's a reason that worked well the past years, is because Canada was involved in it for the most part. They were just out there making it happen as they needed to. He has to understand and look back and say, okay, we were at our best in these specific situations when I let my quarterback dictate the offense to a certain degree. And he has to rely on that a little bit in tough situations, and just learn that, like, yeah, maybe it doesn't make me look the best if my quarterback is one who's making these things happen, but we're going to win games where we're going to score more points. If he can't do that, then there's no reason he should be back anyway. We've talked about that, but especially if he's going to limit Pickett's ability to learn how to play the position as best as he can, that's even worse than just allowing him to come back. Because if you just have another bad offense, you can get rid of him, and Kenny can thrive from there. If he's limiting his ability to develop as a quarterback, that puts you behind the 8 ball even more than just having him back next year.
Yeah, I absolutely hate hearing this, because how
it's
limited
terrible.
the Steelers offense is. And it's no surprise. Like, go back and watch the tape, and you watch Steelers run into a stacked box when it's like cover one. I mean, you have to be able to audible. You have to be able to give your quarterback the ability to adjust routes under center. And if he's not able to do that, your offense is going to be bad. I don't really don't care who the quarterback is. If you don't have the flexibility to do that, your offense is going to be missing an entire element where you can take advantage of the defensive look that you're getting. And so that's what he doesn't have right now. Like, I feel like what Canada needs to do, he not only does he need to give Pickett the reins to do that, and he better do it this time around, especially now after what we know that he didn't do it at all. He needs to do that. And I feel like just the entire game plan itself is not, it does not really fit Pickett's skill set. I didn't think it did from the beginning, because he's driving everything to the sidelines, and he's throwing balls on the sidelines down the field. His heat map was red hot in the middle of the field during his senior year at Pitt. That's where Pickett thrives, in his ability to scramble around, keep his eyes down the field, make a play over the middle of the football field. That's what he's not been allowed to do, and it is very, very frustrating. All right, we're going to move on here to our next topic. If you are a fan of the Pittsburgh Steelers and you would like to support the Steel Curtain Podcast, please consider subscribing to the Steel Curtain Podcast on YouTube. We appreciate all of your support. All right, Shane, let's dive into a fun topic here. We're going to talk about the Senior Bowl. I get excited about the Senior Bowl every year. I don't know about you. Not necessarily all the best prospects from the draft here, but we got some guys. I mean, we got some dogs that are going to be in the first round of the draft this year. We got a lot of day two players. And so let's kind of go down through these and talk about the players that the Steelers could be targeting. Obviously, we know that Mike Tomlin is there. We've seen him all over Twitter. And Tomlin kind of parked himself in front of the offensive lineman down there. So interesting to see that as well. Most teams send their brass on hand. And so, and Steelers have visited with some of these players, but I wouldn't read too deeply into that. Everybody visits with everybody down there. It's just the way that it works. But it is interesting to know, because the Steelers clearly didn't hide their interest for a quarterback last year. I mean, they met with all those guys. They took those guys out to dinner. And so it'll be interesting to see what they do during Senior Bowl week.
Yeah, and I think that the fact that he's parked himself in front of the offensive line group is not only smart, but just really refreshing for this team, because we've talked a lot about it. They desperately need to address the offensive line with higher draft picks, more talented players. Even if it doesn't work out, like, at some point you have to be willing to allocate resources to that part of the field. And look at the teams that are in the Super Bowl right now, right? All of them have both of them have excellent offensive lines. They've built them up over the years. They have really high level players, not just quality starters, but some of the best in the business at different positions. Like, it's a big part of building your team. And like, our offensive line did play better than we would have thought they would, but it
Mhm.
still isn't good enough to elevate the rest of the team around them or to elevate the offense, especially. And again, because of some of these guys down here, like again, there's some first round caliber players, there's some guys that could be really fun projects. Like whatever the case may be, it's definitely going to be interesting to see how many of these guys they meet with truly and have true visits with, because that could kind of tip their hand like they have done in the past couple of years. So.
Yeah, and I mean, we've talked about this before, but when you don't spend higher than a third round pick on your offensive line in over a decade now, which is the last time they took one in the first or second round, they got David DeCastro and they doubled up with Mike Adams back in 2012. And so we are far removed from
Yeah,
that.
yeah.
DeCastro and Pouncey have been retired both for a couple of years now. And so they need to make those investments back in the trenches again. We can say, yes, the Steelers' offensive line played better in the second half of the year. They had that continuity, and they were very fortunate, Shane. They were the healthiest offensive line in the league.
That's part of it.
We don't know what it would have looked like. Like, let's say if Dan Moore or Okorafor would have gotten injured last year, you are inserting Trent Scott or Jesse Davis in the lineup, and it's going to be a disaster. And so, and they go back to looking like a bad offensive line again. So we can't assume that their good luck in terms of the health is going to continue like that. They've got to bolster this offensive line. And not only that, not only do they need depth, I think they need drastic improvements at several positions, offensive tackle being at the forefront. And so let's start with the most intriguing prospect at the Senior Bowl, one of the most intriguing prospects in the draft, because we just have not seen a guy like this before. And that is Ohio State offensive tackle, Dawan Jones. All right, so get this. Dawan Jones comes into the Senior Bowl with some of the most impressive size metrics we've ever seen at the position before. And I've got this pulled up right here. This is his official weigh-in at the Senior Bowl. 6'08", over 6'8" tall, 375 pounds, 11 3/8 inch hands, 36 5/8 inch arms, and an 89.5-inch wingspan. His wingspan is the largest in 74 years at the Senior Bowl. And when you compare it to Mock Draftable's database of players entering the NFL since 1999, it is the largest wingspan ever by an NFL player. He has such freakish traits. And at 375, he does not carry his weight poorly. And so I went and watched, I watched most of the all 22 cut-ups from day one. Dawan Jones is impressive. The guy is impressive. You cannot go through him at that size and with his anchoring ability. And it's so hard to get around him with the longest arms and wingspan we've ever seen at the position before. So what do you make of him? And do you think that he would be a player? He doesn't really fit the mold of what the Steelers have right now in their offensive line. They've got more of the athlete, nimble mover types. Would Tomlin and the Steelers be interested in adding someone like that?
So it's a little hard to say, I think, for whether they'd be interested, but I can say that they should be. This is a guy
Mhm.
from just from a measurement standpoint. I understand measurements are not what makes you a good football player, but it really adds to how good you can be, because it just gives you the upside, especially at tackle. When you are this long, if you can have the play strength to make that work, if you can keep good technique and at least be a good enough technician to not get destroyed by inside moves, spin moves, the stuff that can beat the bigger, slower tackles. If he can just learn to be a decent technician, almost by default, he's going to be an average starting tackle, because it's so hard to get around guys like this. I mean,
Mhm.
this is Trent Brown like level size, and actually bigger when you look
Yeah.
factor in height, wingspan, arm. Like he is, if he can be as good as Trent Brown has been in his career, then that's worth, a first round pick realistically, especially like a
Mhm.
late first round pick. But if you don't, he's probably not. I don't think he's going to be first round pick unless the measurements really boost him up. I still think there's some things in his tape that I've been able to see, that because I watched a few Ohio State games so far this year, looking at C.J. Stroud and guys like that. He's definitely not 100% polished and ready to go. But I think if you gave him especially a year to sit and get it with a technician, get with your offensive line coach that, and teach him the style that you want him to be, he could end up being a very, very quality tackle on, really, I think, right or left. I think left tackle obviously is more valuable, but I think he could play that. He didn't play that with Paris Johnson on the other side of him. That's totally fair. I understand why he's going to be a very high draft pick himself. But again, you just don't see measurements like this. This is stuff that if he can just make it work, and he doesn't have terrible tape now. If he was terrible in college, it might be a different conversation about how highly we should think of him. He was
Yeah.
a quality tackle in college, and I think he's only going to get better, especially with coaching in the NFL. Maybe get him, even if he can get down, not that his weight really is a problem, I don't think, for him, but if he can be like 360 at this size,
Mhm.
That's still massive, but it's gonna be even, he's gonna be even lighter on his feet. He's gonna be able to maybe be a little bit better as a pass blocker on the move. Like, the potential is limitless with a guy with this size profile, and I think that depending on the team he goes to, he could very, very well work out as a better player than some guys drafted ahead of him.
Yeah, I think he's so intriguing, Shane, because we've seen this type of player in recent years, and I don't think anybody expected them to turn out as well as they did. Orlando
Yeah.
Brown Jr. is an example.
Yes.
Mammoth guy like that, nearly 6'8", 345 pounds coming into the league. And what's interesting about Orlando Brown is he was a 7th percentile athlete. I mean, he was an
Yes.
awful athlete at the position. It just didn't matter because he was so powerful and his arms were so long. It's so hard to get around the guy. And once he got a little bit more polished, I mean, he's played right tackle, he's played left tackle. I mean, Orlando Brown is what's interesting about him is he went from a team on the Baltimore Ravens with the narrowest splits in the league, where it's all about being formed in tight, having tight ends on both sides of you and pounding the guy in front of you. And then he went to Kansas City and was a Pro Bowl level left tackle there in wide splits, where you're way more responsible in pass protection. And so it worked out both ways from Brown. And Brown was a guy coming from the Big 12 before he came into college. Another example, a recent example of that, is Jordan Mailata from the Eagles, who is a tremendous football player right now. A very similar size profile, 6'8", 345 pounds coming out of college. Did not test particularly well in terms of his agility stuff. A good athlete overall for his size. But Mailata is excellent right now. And so I think that there's a chance Dawan Jones could be very similar to those type of guys. Now, maybe he doesn't play left tackle in the NFL, but if he's Rob Havenstein at right tackle, or if he's a guy who can be that mold where you are just a mammoth at the position, that guys can't go through you and they can't go around you. Like, Jones he's 100 pounds heavier than a guy like TJ Watt, who he's going to be going up against, the best of the best pass rushers in the league. That is a great size advantage and a great length advantage over players like that. And like I said, you just can't go through him. You're going to have to find a way around him. And he's got so much length on you that even if you're an athlete, which we saw already in this day one of Senior Bowl, he went up against Andre Carter the second.
Yeah, one of the best
Carter
athletes
is
in the draft, in my
yeah, he's a
opinion,
freak athlete. I mean, a 6'7", 255-pound edge rusher who can really burn around the edge. And he just got embarrassed by Dawan Jones because gets his hands on you, it's all over. And so
it's over.
I think there is a lot to be said here. And knowing that he's that true tackle prospect, at the very least, you should be getting a very, very quality right tackle. And I've heard this morning, even, Shane, I would not be surprised if he went in the end of the first round. I would not be surprised
with measurements like this.
If he went with measurements like this. I mean, I compare him kind of like the Jordan Davis of the offensive side of the ball this year. We were all enthralled with Jordan Davis. And a lot of it was because he was such a freak athlete. Jones isn't going to test like that, but he is freaky as we've ever seen in terms of his size and length at the position. And I think that is going to make him a fast riser, especially with a good Senior Bowl week here. And if that happens, I would almost solidify him as a first-round pick if he can continue dominating the rest of the Senior Bowl week. But I'll be very interested to see if that's a guy that Pat Meyer likes, if that's a guy that Mike Tomlin likes. I really hope they bring him in for a visit. I genuinely do, because I think that he's a guy who would help out a lot, and he's a mauler. He had over a 90 run grade this past year. He's graded out well in both seasons at Ohio State, obviously coming from a great football program. Just not many guys built like him. And so I don't want to dwell on one player for too long, but I was definitely pleased by what I saw from Dawan Jones. Let's move on to another prospect here. This one, I mean, equally as high praise. O'Cyrus Torrence, the guard from Florida. Now, I don't know how you feel about guard, Shane, and probably if the Steelers would have to take Torrence, they'd probably have to do it at 17. I don't think he's available for the 33rd pick, and he had a really strong first day as well. So give me your thoughts on Torrence real quick.
Yeah, I mean, he's a road grader, right? I mean, like, the thing with him is he fits what the offensive style we have right now is. I don't know if it's what I want it to be long term, but if you're trying to just upgrade at a position that still is a little bit shaky, especially because Dotson did have a bit of a up and down year. Obviously, you don't know if you're sold on him. You like James Daniels, you like Mason Cole for the most part. Maybe they upgrade from him too, and there's a guy we'll talk about with that too. But in general, if you're just trying to make a strength a even bigger strength, that is the type of pick you make, because again, the run game is going to naturally get better with a guy like that. And I think Daniel Jeremiah, I think in his first mock draft, this is who he gave us at 17, was O'Cyrus Torrence, if I'm not mistaken. So there's already some thoughts, from high level guys on that. Just a really good player. I do wonder, like, how great of a pass blocker he can be at this point, and it's like especially early on because Dotson, weirdly enough, even though he was kind of considered more of a road grader himself, he's been better as a pass blocker overall than a run blocker in his career.
Mhm.
I think we might see a flip in that if you were to replace him with Torrance. But again, if we're not going to have a high level passing game, we probably won't at least next year. This would make it easier to kind of just pound the rock with Najee and Warren. So
Yeah, I really like Torrance as a prospect. I think he's the best pure guard prospect in this class. Now,
I
some
would say
people will
so.
argue
Yeah,
Skoronsky, if you view him as a guard,
yeah,
that's where
technically, yeah. Then
I
yeah,
know because Skoronsky, I don't know. I mean, it's going to be interesting where his arm length comes in at the
yeah,
combine. He's not a senior, so he's obviously not here at the Senior Bowl week, but supposed to test as a pretty good athlete and a guy that could probably play maybe 4 or 5 positions across the offensive line and do
realistically,
so
yeah.
at a
If you
high
wanted me
level.
to,
So outside of maybe Skoronsky, I mean, he's definitely the best pure guard prospect coming into the Senior Bowl. And I was impressed with what I saw from him too. Tremendous power, is able to keep the guys in front of him. Like you said, kind of a road grader there. My question with Torrance would be, if the Steelers have to take him in the first round, if he's not going to be there with that second round pick, is it worth the upgrade? Is it a big enough upgrade from Dotson to Torrance? And you got to consider, because guards are not as valuable as tackles. I don't care what anybody tries to tell you. Tackles are more valuable to your football team. It's why they get paid significantly more. Guards are still valuable, but again, it's one piece of a unit of 5 that you need. And so is the upgrade difference between Dotson, kicking Dotson to the bench and putting Torrance in there, is that significant enough, knowing that you still have kind of liabilities at the tackle position, or maybe go a different route altogether and say, hey, there's good cornerbacks on their board, or hey, I mean, Jordan Addison is here, can help out Kenny Pickett. What do you think? I mean, PFF's WAR, their wins above replacement metric would show that, I mean, a wide receiver, a cornerback, and offensive tackle, those would all make a lot more of a difference to your football team. And so I don't know how I feel about him with that pick, Shane, but I would like him a lot if he was able to slip into the second round.
I mean, ideally, because you don't want to have to take a guard in the first round unless it's a true
Mm-hmm.
like difference
Yeah, you
making
need like that
guard.
David DeCastro level
Yeah,
prospect, I think,
DeCastro.
if
You
you're
know,
taking.
you look at guys like Zion Johnson last year, who was an awesome player out of Boston College, a guy that I
Mhm.
liked for the Steelers, possibly if they didn't go quarterback. Like, it has to be a player in that mold, I think, for it to be truly a quality pick. But again, if you're just trying to build upon a strength, this would be a way to do it. I would rather
Mhm.
than go tackle at 17, unless there's just nobody that fits in that mold at that point. If you're kind of all
Yeah.
the top level guys are gone, you don't want to take maybe a guy like Daywon Jones that early, then you're kind of in the middle there. That's where I would say, even though offensive line I think needs to be the focus, maybe you do take, like you
Mhm.
said, a receiver or a corner. If there's better players at those spots at that point, maybe you do that and you take somebody in the second. But again, I don't think he'll be there, and especially if he is the consensus #1 guard, I think someone will take him before our pick in the second round, and just kind of is
Mhm.
what it is with that, unfortunately.
Yeah, and you mentioned Zion Johnson from last year, another guy that I really liked, impressive at the Senior Bowl. Obviously, just a guard. He was not a tackle at all. But
Right.
we look at a guy like Johnson, as good as he was as like a guard prospect. A lot of people were like, "All right, this is like." I want to give an example, like the Dallas Cowboys. They took Tyler Smith out of Tulsa in the first round last year. They gambled on an offensive tackle, a raw offensive tackle with upside, and it really paid off for them. I
Yeah.
think Tyler Smith's going to be a good tackle for a long time. He's going to be their left tackle in Dallas. Protecting Dak Prescott. And I think that is just so much more valuable. So when we're talking about
Overall,
spending
yeah.
first round draft capital, I think you really need to be, if you're targeting the offensive line, I think the Steelers really need to be narrowed in on the offensive tackle position, because if you are a good tackle prospect and for some reason you can't make it there, you can almost always kick inside and be a quality guard,
Right,
depending
to a
on your
certain degree,
build.
yeah.
And yeah, and so like Skoronsky, for example, if he can't work out as a tackle for the Steelers, you should be able to kick that guy inside, a guard, even center, and
Oh,
he
for
should be
sure,
a
yeah.
good football player. So you can't do it the other way, unfortunately. You cannot say, Osiris Torrance, I drafted you at pick 17. I want you to try to play left tackle for us. You can't go backwards. And so, but we have seen a lot of examples of going the other way, where a guard or a tackle goes to a guard in the NFL, they become a good player, like Eric Flowers, who just didn't have the foot movement at tackle, but became a good guard in the NFL. And so
Yeah.
you can definitely go that way with it. So it's interesting to note, just something to keep in mind as the Steelers go through this whole scouting process here. Let's talk about another tackle. That's Tennessee's Darnell Wright, played right tackle for them. I thought he had a pretty good day at the Senior Bowl as well. Day one there. Pretty good movement speed. He meets the size metrics that you like. He's got small hands, but outside of that, he's got the size and the arm length that you desire at the position. He more of like a day 2 type player for me. Like if Steelers miss out on those first wave of tackles, like the Paris Johnson, Broderick Jones, maybe Skoronski, then you're falling down kind of the next tier there. And I would have him below Dawan Jones. I'm going to have Jones higher on my board. But another interesting guy that they could potentially get on day 2 if they miss on a tackle on round 1.
Yeah, I mean, he's a guy that's interesting too because he does have left tackle and right tackle experience. So he does have some versatility there. So you can, if you take him, you don't have to replace one particular player. You could fit him in for Dan Moore, which is probably who I would immediately try to see if you can replace him with. But even if, Core 4, same deal, or if you want to move on from him, or if he's just not playing well, he does have that ability where he's already shown the ability to play both, opposed to having to work it out once he gets in the NFL, which is always nice. But I do think he's more of a day 2 player. Maybe, late second round pick. I wouldn't mind. Maybe our second round pick would make a lot of sense, for him if he's still on the board, if we couldn't get a tackle earlier. But again, he would still be a step up in terms of talent level than what we've drafted recently. So I can't complain about too much, but if we're waiting till around his range to take a tackle, then it probably the board didn't fall the way I would like it for us. But again, still wouldn't, I'm not going to sit here and say it would be a bad pick. I think he has a lot of the measurables you look for and would still at least give you a boost of talent to that tackle room that we have right now.
Yeah, and I agree with you there. And I need to do a lot more film study on Darnell Wright, but I kind of I'm in the same boat as you though, Shane. It's like if the Steelers miss out on that premier player, I want the upgrade still. I think it's important to get an upgrade. Sure. It's just how much of an upgrade are you getting at that point? I do like that he's got experience at both positions, and so you can kind of slide him in, or you just have like a battle and say, hey, you're either going to beat out Chooks, you're going to beat out Dan Moore, but I want you to beat out one of these guys because you're my second round pick. And so I think that's if they went the Darnell Wright route, I can see them doing something like that. And again, right up their scouting region. I mean, he's SEC guy right there from Tennessee. And so definitely there could be enough interest on their part for the Steelers to bring him in for a visit. So I can definitely see something like that happening. And it probably would be a decent fallback plan if they were to miss out on the top wave of tackles there. All right, Shane, this next guy, for those of you who are Quinn Miners fans, I think you're going to like this guy a lot. And not just because they resemble each other in appearance, but this is that small, gritty, small school prospect type of guy this year who has been very impressive so far. And that's Cody Mauch from North Dakota State. Obviously, a little bit of concern come from a non-Power 5 program. We did see Dylan Radunz do it a few years back and be a quality pick. And so I like Cody Mauch. He's not a tackle like he played in college. He's going to be guard or even maybe even a center in the NFL. I don't think that they used him there yet in the cut-ups that I watched. But this guy is feisty and he's got good foot movement. He just seems like he wins pretty much every rep. So Shane, I don't know if you've watched much of Mauch so far, but what do you make of him?
I haven't watched much of him, especially like any college tape of his, but I did see a couple of clips put around because I know he has some fans in the scouting community, like every small school offensive lineman eventually does. But I do think as a guard prospect, like you see, he's not going to play tackle. I think he just doesn't really have he's 6'6", 303, I think is what he came in at, something like that.
Yeah, he's pretty light and he has 4 arms. So
so it's, again, I feel like as a guard though, I think he has really good movement skills. He could be a very good zone run blocker, especially for teams that need that. I don't know if he fits exactly what they want in a guard in Pittsburgh right now in terms of the ability to kind of be on the move, because really we need guys who can stuff guys inside and get guys out of the way. Not that he couldn't do that, but I think he has the mentality to do that. But I think his skill set would be best in kind of like one of those like Shanahan zone type of running schemes, honestly. But even still, like if you can get a guy like him in the 3rd, 4th round, which I think is probably where his sweet spot's going to be, it at least gives you another option where if Dotson really falls off, if whatever else, if you maybe think he can play a little bit of center, if he can be a backup to that position too, that is going to really upgrade the depth of the offensive line, if nothing else, and give you a fallback option if one of those guys just doesn't cut it next year.
Yeah, I would kind of liken Cody Mauch to kind of like Cole Strange last year, who ended up going in the 1st round for the New England Patriots, which might have been a little bit of a stretch there. But that small school guy with decent size measurables for an inside guy, not going to play tackle, but a guy with pretty good movement skills, a feisty demeanor, can keep guys in front of him. And every rep that I watched from him so far at the Senior Bowl, it's very limited. It's just one day of cut-ups so far, but those first day reps were impressive. And so if he can do that the rest of the week, he could be one of those Senior Bowl standouts who ends up making a name for himself and go somewhere on day 2 there. So another name to watch. I don't know how much interest Steelers would have. I mean, does Steelers know that there's land outside of the Mississippi River out west? I don't know, because they only draft guys, it seems like, from their scouting region. And so I don't know like how much how much they're going to be scouting a guy like that, a small school guy like that, that's not in their own neck of the woods. But interesting. It'll be interesting to see what they do. Next guy up here is we've got the top center prospect, true center prospect this year, and that is John Michael Schmitz. Not to be confused with his brother, John Jacob Jingleheimer Schmidt. I had to throw that out. I mean, I'm a father of five. I got to get a dad joke in there every once in a while when I can, Shane.
There you go.
No, it's John Michael Schmidt. He's an interesting football player. I went watch his rep. He had one loss where he got kind of bulldozed. The rest of that looked really good, and he was able to throw guys around. He's, again, another fiery player who kind of just finishes every rep strong. That would be interesting. I don't know how much interest do you think the Steelers would have? Already having Mason Cole, who had a pretty respectable season this year.
He did, yeah. I think what it comes down to for him is how early do you have to draft him? Because we saw guys that are realistically better prospects like Creed Humphrey go late the second round.
Yeah.
Like I think it just depends on how much the NFL values him is probably, like I said, the top center, and you mentioned it in the draft. If he's going to be a late second round pick, early third round pick, then I think the value matches up, especially because, again, he is a road grader type of guy. He's not as nimble as you like some centers to be nowadays, like the ability to get out and make plays in space. Like you see, obviously this is a different caliber player, but Jason Kelsey, those types of guys, like that mold of center, he's not that kind of guy. But again, for what we want and what we're looking for, that's not really what we need anyway. So he would be a good fit for what we do. Again, it really just comes down to where you have to draft them. Because, again, if you can draft them late second, early third, I think that's totally fine. If you have to draft him with like our second pick in the draft completely, that might be a little bit too rich, especially depending on what else is there. Probably quality corners are still there, maybe even a tackle still there if you don't take him in the first. It's just going to probably come down to where he's at draft wise, because depending on what teams need, because there are some teams I think could use an upgraded center, but are they willing to draft one in the second round or earlier? So.
Yeah, and I agree. If it comes in where it's in the sweet spot where John Michael Schmitz falls down there, then I think that's when you have to consider it. Center is not a big enough need right now. I think that Cole did a respectable enough job. Now I still think that Mason Cole is going to be just a stopgap player for the Steelers, and he might get another year or two depending on how things go here. But they need to find that long-term replacement, their next Marquise Pouncey, the guy that's going to be there for the long haul and be that center that has that chemistry with Kenny Pickett there.
Yeah.
And so they don't have that guy yet. And realistically, Mason Cole's probably already halfway or so through his NFL career. But it is interesting. It would have to be either that second round pick, the third round pick. But Shane, what I heard is that I can't remember who said this, but somebody's talked about him going in the late first round. And if that's
I have heard talks about that too.
Question.
Yeah, I don't think that it's just not going to happen if that's the case. I mean, that would be pretty rich for a center in this draft class, but I do get it. I mean, he is a very good player. I don't want to sit here and say that he isn't necessarily worth that, but just we haven't seen centers historically go very high in the draft, and there's a reason for that, because typically you can find some day 2, day 3 guys who are very, very good players for a long time, and that's probably going to be the case for him. I still would be surprised unless he really gets pushed up, just because there's just that someone really needs a center badly enough that they want to come up and get him in late first. But if they want to do that, that's totally fine. I think it's not going to be the worst thing in the world for the Steelers or anything.
Yeah, and they typically do end up sliding, like you alluded to already. Creed Humphrey was a better prospect. There's no doubt in my mind. He had everything. He tested as a 100th percentile athlete. He was big. He was powerful. So just dominated every rep at the Senior Bowl. And so that's not going to be John Michael Schmitz. But for the right price, I can kind of get behind that. It'll be interesting to see if that's a player that they kind of use a visit on here as well. Let's go to the defensive side of the ball here for a minute. Isaiah Forksy out of Notre Dame. This is a guy who kind of really fits like the size profile they're looking for. However, I don't know if Steelers are going to be willing to spend a high enough pick on him. This guy was really productive over the last 2 seasons. Kind of has those tools. They're one of the best edge defenders that's at the Senior Bowl right now. How do you think that will play out?
I think how they view the edge class and like who they visit with, if they do visit with anybody in the edge class, I think that's going to really kind of look at or be an early look at what they think they're going to be able to do with Alex Highsmith long term. Because if you're willing to take a guy like this guy in the second round, because that's where you're probably going to have to take him, at this point. The edge depth is really good in this class, so I don't think he's going to get up into the first or anything like that. But he's going to probably be a second round pick, and probably a relatively early one, just from early reports on him. If you're willing to take a guy that high at edge. You know, we talked earlier in the year about how, like, if we had a top 5 pick at the end of the year, maybe you take a Will Anderson just because he's the best player. That's a different
Yeah.
conversation because
Yeah.
that's more of just a best player available thing. If you take a guy like this in the second round, that kind of tells me that you either don't know if you're going to be able to keep Highsmith long term, or you just are really committed to fixing the edge depth, which that I'm fine with. That would be something I'd want to look at, but I don't
Mhm.
know if I want to do it with one of our top 3 picks in the draft. That's
Yeah.
probably a little too early for that.
Yeah, there's fans. I've talked to fans on both sides that are very open-minded about the idea of drafting an edge as early as their first pick on day 2, and other ones who are just completely opposed to it at all, saying,
And I
"Hey, we
get
got
it.
TJ
Either
Watt,
way.
we got Alex Highsmith." I think I would fall more so somewhere in the middle, but you do
Mhm.
need an insurance policy. I mean, you've
Of course,
got
yeah.
one of the most expensive defenders in football. You've got a reigning defensive player of the year in TJ Watt, and you had no insurance policy. And look what happened when TJ Watt was out.
Malik
That
Reed
team was
happened. That's
bad.
what
I mean,
happened.
Malik Reed happened, and it was
Yeah.
not good. And
No.
not only that, but I cut this up yesterday. I went back and looked at the Steelers game log. Cameron Hayward and Alex Highsmith combined for 4.5
Mhm.
sacks without TJ Watt on the field. They combined for 17.5 sacks when TJ Watt was on the field. Coincidence? I think not. I
No,
don't
I
get
don't
it.
think
You can
so.
argue schedule, whatever you want to do, and you can say that TJ wasn't the same when he came back, and that's fine. But you cannot convince me that he didn't have a hand in that.
Oh,
And
yeah.
so you need an insurance policy for him. You cannot have just some average Joe coming off the bench and say, "Hey, go do what TJ Watt does." Nobody's going to do that. But if you had an Isaiah Forksy, or if you had somebody like that who can come in and say, "Hey, you are definitely a step above any backup edge rusher we had since Alex Highsmith was that backup to Bud Dupree." And so I feel like that's what you need for the Steelers. The Steelers desperately need that guy. I probably agree. I don't think that the Steelers will take one with a second round pick. I feel like it's
It's
too
a little too
rich
early.
because the position is already solidified in terms of starters, the way starters go. But they definitely need a strong backup. And again, we look at other good teams, the Cowboys, the 49ers, teams that deploy, the Eagles, they deploy 2 full rotations
Yes.
of edge
Yes.
rushers and defensive linemen. And they're saying, "Hey, I'm going to keep my guys fresh. No, I'm not going to make my studs play 80 to 90% of snaps in the game. We're going to stay fresh. We're going to rotate in, and we're going to have a bunch of guys that can get after the quarterback, not just 2." And I think that's where Steelers go wrong, is they're kind of stuck in the past a little bit, if you will, saying that I'm going to have 2 great edge rushers, and these are my guys. And what happens if somebody gets injured? Then your season kind of goes down the tubes a little bit, and your defense really struggles like it did this past year. So they can't get themselves in that situation. They do need to invest in an edge defender. It's just whether that comes early day 2, late day 2, or early day 3. And I think it needs to come in one of those 3 areas there. They can't wait till the end of the draft unless you're getting a guy in free agency. So it'll be interesting to see what they do. Forksy, good football player, pretty well-rounded guy, very productive these past 2 years at Notre Dame. Next name on the list is maybe the other best edge rusher who's at the Senior Bowl right now, and that is Andre Carter, who could go even higher than Forksy here.
Oh, yeah.
Again, he's from Army, and so the competition that he played wasn't very good. But when you're 6'7" with length and in pass rush ability and speed and athleticism, I mean, this guy was a former wide receiver coming in who switched, transitioned to defense, and looks like just could be has the upside to be a phenomenal football player in the NFL. Do you think the Steelers would have any interest in this guy at all?
I mean, interest, sure, because a lot of people will, but I think it's just a little too high
Mhm.
because, again, he's a guy that I could see kind of actually ending up between 17 and 32, somewhere between those 2,
Yeah.
picks for us. Probably in between those, like, probably 17 is probably a little too high because there's a lot of edge players in this class. 32 probably be gone by then. It just doesn't really fit, like, not only where we're picking, but again, just a little too early for an edge rusher. But this guy has a lot of traits. I mean, obviously the
Mhm.
Army competition situation, we understand that, but, like, with edge rushers especially, like, the traits that these guys have is so important to have, and it's something you have to
Yeah.
really focus on. He has all of the things you'd look for, and especially even in a developmental edge prospect, let alone a guy that's already played well enough to be in the first round consideration. I'd be very surprised if he's, the first round, especially. And again, it's just a little too early, I think, for the Steelers to take one.
Yeah, when you do look at edge players, though, I value traits over production in college, and I think
Especially
that, I
in
mean,
college, yes, yeah.
there's a lot of analytics that would back that up, and Jarvis Jones is just one example of that. They valued
Yeah,
production over traits,
we know that. Yeah.
and we all know how that story went. And again, though, it's not going to be it's going to be a case by case basis and depends on the player. But traits are important for the position. It's why someone like Jason Owe goes in the first round of the draft, because you're drafting traits. And so I
Yes.
think that you want traits, you want upside, you want athleticism, you want length. Those are things you look for. Carter has all of those things. And again, if we're not even talking about him with that second round pick, if he's gone, it's very unlikely that he becomes a Steeler, but a name to note there. And also, like I said, the fact that Dawan Jones was able to handle him early on as well as he did, I thought was pretty impressive. And so something worth noting there as well. Let's talk about, this one's really interesting. Keanu Benton, a defensive lineman. He's a player that Steelers are already reported to have interest in, and you can kind of see why. I mean, almost 6'4", almost 34-inch arms, 312 pounds, not quite like the Tuitt height and length, but a guy that's incredibly stout, a guy that already had some really nice pass rush reps at the Senior Bowl. And so it definitely looks like this is a guy that they could be interested in.
Yeah, as a Wisconsin fan in college football, yeah, this guy is a Steeler player. That's all I can tell you for sure. Not sure if obviously he'll be a player they select, but if they don't, I'll be kind of surprised, honestly. Again, he fits everything that they like in a defensive lineman. He does. I think the pass rush upside is definitely there more than he showed in college. He didn't really have a lot of good opportunities to rush the passer.
Yeah.
He really was that nose tackle type of player, run stopper, and he'll be able to do that, I think, right away in the NFL. I think there's no doubt in my mind that he has the power, the size, like that. He'll be able to be that guy in the middle of the defense for us right away if we needed him to. It does. The question then becomes, how much better can he get? Can he develop some sort of pass rush upside? Can he get that 20, 30, 40 pressures from the nose tackle position every year? Like if he can be a guy like that, that's definitely worth even a higher pick than he'll probably go. Because of the fact that there's no guarantee he's going to be able to rush the passer much. Probably a third-ish round player, I would guess. Probably where he's going to be at. But again, if you can get a guy like this in the third round, you pretty much can say for sure you stick him in the middle and just say 2 gap for us. Don't worry about anything else. That's worth it for a team that doesn't have a lot of defensive line depth right now and has struggled at that position this year. So.
Yeah, so let's use your Wisconsin expertise here for a little bit. Go back to a guy like Isaiah Loudermilk. How different of a football player is this, and how much better of a prospect is Benton over Loudermilk?
So when we drafted Loudermilk, I was not a big fan of that because I just didn't see the athletic upside with him. And as much as he was very much a true like grit, toughness, like relying on just motor player, and that's great to have. That's especially for special teams value for backup defensive line. That's great to have that. It is. But I didn't see him as a true like NFL's prospect in terms of a guy that you think could become a starter at some point. Benton is a different type of player. One, he's a better athlete for his size than Loudermilk was for sure. He's got much more raw power. He is more of a defined role where I think he definitely is a day one nose tackle with hopefully some potential to rush the passer a little bit. It's a completely different class of players, in my opinion, especially just from a prospect standpoint. You never know once a guy gets in the NFL who he's going to be, but he definitely has much more of a chance, I think, to carve out a starting caliber role very quickly opposed to a guy like Isaiah. So.
Yeah, and I can definitely see him in one of those roles, especially when you consider the Steelers' defensive line depth right now.
Exactly,
I mean, Lulu's going to be gone. Montrevious Adams was a disappointment this year. And I think just all around, like even like Larry Ogunjobi, like certainly didn't have the numbers that we would have wanted for the Steelers this year. And he's a free agent. So who knows? They bring a guy like that back. It's whether or not how much can he give us on third down? Can he give us anything as a pass rusher? And if that's the case, then definitely an interesting guy. It's definitely a guy that I think the Steelers will have their eye on. And again, from a school that they like. And so definitely got some connections there as well. A couple more on the list before we finish up here for today. Pitt linebacker, Savosia Dennis. Look good so far. And this guy can move. He can really move. The problem that I have with Dennis is he's like kind of a tweener size a little bit between linebacker, safety. I think he came in just over 6 foot and 218 pounds, I believe, if I'm getting the right measurements here. So not very big. In fact, when we compare him in terms of like he's Terrell Edmonds size, really. I mean, that's Edmonds was like 6'1" 3/4, 217 coming out. And so size wise, not all that different. I think you'd probably be getting that nickel dime type linebacker and a guy that can run and cover. Already has a pick in Senior Bowl drills and looked very fluid in coverage. And a lot of Pitt fans will know about him a lot already. And so what would you think the Steelers would be getting a guy like that? Would they target a guy like that who's undersized, who's not necessarily the guy that they normally look at?
See, that's the thing with it is because it's not the type of player that they generally look at. I have a hard time thinking they're going to look at him, but I really wish they would start looking at guys like this more. This is a type of player that if you get him in the 4th, 5th round, if a later round pick, and he can develop his coverage skills if he can use that athleticism and the fact that he isn't a bigger player to his advantage opposed to his detriment, you could have a quality third down linebacker type of guy where you don't have to put Robert Spillane on the field on third downs. You don't have to put guys like that. Like you can, I think they need to understand that like specialists are obviously becoming more and more of a thing in the NFL. And if you can get a guy who can, even if he really only is valuable on third downs generally, if you can get a guy who can come out there and play third down linebacker, cover a running back out in the flat, cover tight ends even to a certain degree, like that is very valuable to get in the fourth, fifth round. And it just gives you more space to find a true Mike linebacker type of guy if you in the future, but still have somebody who you can put out there and reliably give you good reps and pass coverage and things like that. Like they need to find a guy like that. And again, they already have one in their backyard. I think he'd be a good fit for that type of role. He won't have to play early probably because I think they're going to throw a bunch of guys at linebacker this year in free agency, maybe even in the draft, as well. We'll see how that goes, but I wouldn't hate it for sure, especially if they're willing to use him correctly as like that dime linebacker, like you said.
Yeah, and it really is such an underrated position. I don't think people value it enough. They're always thinking, I need a guy that can stop the run, or I need a guy that can play 3 downs. Not necessarily, because I mean, you want that guy. Obviously, that guy is your
ideally,
preference, but that guy typically goes late day 1, early day 2, and you can't always get those type of football players. I think a nice consolation prize is to be able to get a guy like Servosia Dennis who can come on obvious passing situations and say, yeah, I'm going to be the best coverage linebacker on the team because, first of all, the bar is not very high to clear. And secondly, he can move in coverage just better than those other guys do. And that is what the Steelers have been lacking for so long. Like really since Ryan Shazier's injury, they have not had a guy that can run and cover, and they're desperately needing that. And so whether you get a guy like that or you get a combination of both, say you go out and get one in free agency and then you draft another guy that can be a coverage specialist, I'm all for that. So I feel like you need to kind of solidify that position there, and going the way they're going now with just the downhill linebackers, it's not helping at all. And it's a passing league. I mean, we kind of got to catch up with the times a little bit here. We can't do things like I mean, you can't just have the James Ferriers of the day anymore. You've got to have the guys that can turn, run, and cover with tight ends and slot receivers. And so I think he would kind of fit the bill there. And there's other ones like him in this draft as well. It'd be interesting to see if they target that type of linebacker, or if they just go after their big beefy bruisers like we know they do. They're Mark Robinson types, the guy
more likely
they're Tomlin dogs. He's a dog, so
he is
the guy that matches the physicality that Tomlin likes. So which is important, but I think you need a little bit of both. Did you ever play ice hockey, Shane? This is way before your time. For the regular Nintendo, the regular NES. There was a game called ice hockey back then, and you could pick 3 guys. You could pick a small guy, a huge guy, or a medium guy. And the small guy was fast. The big guy can bully, and the medium guy did a little bit of both. I feel like that's kind of what Steelers linebackers need to be like. You can't just have the big guys. You can't just have the Miles Jack and the Robert Spillane that come downhill. You also need the small guy that can do the things that your other guys can't do. So I liken it to that, and I age myself a lot with that example there. But let's talk about one more name on the list, and before we sign off for today, and that is the only wide receiver I have listed here, probably the top wide receiver at the Senior Bowl. That's Rashee Rice out of SMU. Not necessarily a school that the Steelers typically look at, but a very good football player. And I feel like if the Steelers miss out on maybe the Jordan Addison pick in the first round, let's say he goes before Pittsburgh's pick, which is likely. You look at last year's draft. I mean, Jahan Dotson went at pick 16, and there were 5 receivers taken before their first round pick. And so definitely can see Addison being off the board already at that time. Obviously, you wouldn't take a player like Rashee Rice here. But I mean, this is a team that drafts the receiver on day 2 pretty much every year. Would he be a guy that Steelers would be interested in at all?
I mean, I like this skill set. The thing I am concerned is I think the only way they would draft him is if they're willing to put Deontay in the slot basically full time, because Rice is a outside possession, like physicality type of guy. Like he has the run after catch ability that maybe a Pickens doesn't have. But other than that, he's very similar to Pickens in the sense that he doesn't always get open very easily, but he is very tough to cover just because he can go up and get the ball over just about anybody. A lot of his highlights are the jump ball, like contested catches. And he's been very good at that. And I think that that's, again, a very valuable skill set. However, having Pickens on the roster already, Deontay playing really outside for most of his career, I feel like this is not the type of receiver they're probably going to go for early on. Especially if they're not going to be able to get a Jordan Addison type, or they're not going to be able to get, one of the more premier receivers. Probably looking at a 3rd, 4th round, maybe slot more type kind of guys who they'd be going after. Not really what Rice's skill set is. So although I wouldn't be opposed to it too much just because I like that type of receiver, especially if he can get open a little bit easier in the
Mhm.
NFL, which if he can develop that, it feels kind of like too much of the same thing if you look at him and Pickens on the field together.
Yeah, I get that for sure. And so he probably isn't the best fit. Although I do think that Johnson needs to take a huge step back in terms of his role with the team.
Yeah, in
This is not a
general,
guy you
yes,
should
in
be
general,
peppering
yeah.
147 to 166 targets a year like he's gotten over like the last 4 years. And so you can't do that with him anymore. He's just not efficient enough and he's not consistent enough from game to game or year to year to do that. So I wouldn't mind. I honestly, genuinely would not mind seeing Johnson maybe be in on the field as the X receiver and 12 personnel, and then maybe slide into the slot and see if you can do a little bit more after the catch or something when we go to 11 personnel, and maybe have a different type of receiver on the outside, one that can maybe chew up some yards after did not do last year at all for Steelers. And so part of that's going to be a scheme and game plan type thing. But I think either way, and I know that people are saying, oh, we got the receiver position solidified. We got Calvin Austin coming back. We got Anthony Miller. And that's true. I mean, I want to see what those guys can do. I don't want to write them off. I think that I'm
Yeah.
excited about Calvin Austin still. He is tiny, but he is very athletic. And in terms of like Anthony Miller, I don't know. I don't want to overhype his role because he's going to be a 28-year-old receiver coming off a season-ending injury. He's been on 3 NFL teams. So I don't know how much to expect from the pair of them together, but I still think that they could use another receiver and another receiver that can actually play outside. I'm not talking about a Miles Boykin who is strictly just a special teams guy. They need a receiver that can play outside in the event that Johnson gets injured or Pickens gets injured, and they need the depth. They need a guy that they can have as their third or fourth true receiver on that team. So I'm not opposed to them drafting a receiver. It's a weak receiver class, unfortunately. And so if they miss out on those top guys, there's a teardrop, and I don't know when is best to take one. But Rashid Rice does look pretty good at the Senior Bowl so far. I think he's going to end up being that day 2 pick. I'm not sure when he actually goes on day 2, but a name worth pointing out at the very least. All right. Do you have anybody else that you want to talk about, Shane? Any other names we didn't get to?
Not for now. I do want to take a look at it and over the course of this week, and I'm sure we'll have more guys to talk about as things progress and we learn more. But I think it's a pretty good list of guys right now. So again, a lot of offensive linemen, defensive linemen, edge. That's really where I think the strength of the Senior Bowl definitely is, and I think that that's also kind of where the Steelers need to focus for the most part. So hopefully it'll work
Yeah.
out for us once we get to the draft. So.
Yeah, Shane and I will do a lot more of the Senior Bowl breakdowns. Probably do that next week, even and when it's fresh in our mind, and we'll go back over some of those players and high performances from the Senior Bowl. Senior Bowl, you can catch it on Saturday. Thank you for joining us today on the show. You can follow Shane on Twitter at Shayne Kubas. You can follow me on Twitter at Tommy Jaggi. You can download the Still Curtain podcast wherever you get your podcast. Also, check us out on YouTube. And thanks for listening to the Still Curtain podcast.